Unmanned aircraft systems, or drones, are becoming increasingly popular. In fact, the FAA says they are the fastest growing segment in the entire transportation sector. This means safety is more important than ever. To that end, the FAA published some new rules in January that go into effect this month, March of 2021. Here to talk about what these rules mean for professional users in the geospatial community is Bryan Baker, Unmanned Aircraft Systems Sales Manager for Leica Geosystems in the US and Canada. Bryan is a small unmanned aircraft system pilot and FAA Advanced Ground Instructor. He also volunteers as an FAA Safety Team Representative and is a designated drone pro for the Southwestern US. Welcome, Bryan.
Thank you, Christy.
So, Bryan, the final rule published in the Federal Register is pretty comprehensive. I believe it's 700 pages. Is this as intimidating as it sounds?
No, not really, because the final regulations are actually pretty small. They only consist of a couple of pages, 1 to 2 at the most. The final rule, the 724 something pages, I believe, that you're referring to, is all of the discussion, kind of the narrative behind the FAA's thinking in putting together these regulations. So it helps me to understand why the regulations are the way that they are and explain them to our customers who have questions about it. But the new regulations themselves are actually pretty small. Part 107 of the Code of Federal Regulations in Title 14 for aviation is still one of the smallest sections in the aviation regulation at under 10 pages. Compared that to the general aviation regulations, which are about 150, 160 in Part 91. So the regulation edition is actually really small. But the narrative, the FAA had to address all 53,000 plus questions or comments that were submitted to them regarding this final rule proposal. And they take them and they categorize them into different sections, and then they pick out specific comments to either substantiate or refute the arguments for or against the rules that they're making. So that's kind of the whole narrative behind the actual 700 something pages. So something to kind of nerd out on, but it's not something that most people are going to read, and certainly not something that people have to know in the course of FAA regulations regarding operating a drone.
Okay, good. Well, let's focus on the aircraft requirements, specifically the rule involving remote ID. This is a big one. Can you give us a quick rundown?
Yes, so the FAA is proposing that every aircraft broadcast its position, altitude, and speed along with the position of the operator, the control station. And the initial idea behind this was that you'd have to have an internet connection, and this information would be broadcast to a service provider, someone like Kitty Hawk or Skyward or AirMap, something like that. But that came in as being way too onerous. There were just thousands upon thousands of comments that this was way too onerous for not only the manufacturer, but also for the drone operator, who would require a cellular connection. And many of our customers work in places where land development is one of our key markets, right? So there may not be cellular coverage, and if the aircraft can't even take off without cellular coverage or cellular connection, that's really a problem. So this was addressed by the FAA, backing down from that requirement and saying, okay, as long as the aircraft somehow broadcasts this information that people can read using a smartphone or a tablet with some app on it, then that'll be good enough. So the only requirement is that the aircraft be able to have that positional information for the aircraft and the controller and broadcast it on some medium. So they back down from that quite a bit, which is really good for a lot of our users.
So is this something that most drones do already in terms of making that broadcast signal?
Well, they are to a certain extent. The aircraft is broadcasting its position back to the control unit, and most of these are Wi-Fi type connections because Wi-Fi has the strength to get the range necessary to do that. but they're not broadcasting the operator's position. And in most cases, the aircraft doesn't know the operator's position. It knows where it took off from, but that's about it. The operator may or may not actually be at that location. They may move around. So getting the position of the operator from the control unit back to the aircraft and having the aircraft then rebroadcast that is going to be more of a challenge for some manufacturers. Fortunately for us, we already have our position. Our controller is positionally aware, so wherever the operator moves, the controller knows where it is. So for us, it's not that much of a challenge to implement. But for smaller drones, it's going to be more challenging on that aspect of it.
So how can the FAA expect users to comply with the new rule if it's going to be such a challenge for manufacturers?
Right. Well, so they're kind of trying to close the barn door after the horses have already left. There's millions of drones out there that do not have this capability now. So, of course, as manufacturers, we're going to be required to produce drones that adhere to this new regulation. And so that's fine. But getting customers to retrofit and use drones that have this capability, that's going to be a little bit more challenging. So part of my job is outreach, and all of our customers, they certainly want to be compliant. They don't want to run afoul of regulatory issues, regulatory requirements. Most of our customers are dealing with requirements from other regulatory agencies such as OSHA and FEMA and other NGS. So regulatory issues are not foreign to most of our users. So I don't expect the professional geospatial drone user to have a problem with adhering to this or complying with it. It's the other 95% of drone users out there that are doing really low end operations like roof photography or wedding photography or some things like this that are going to have a real challenge getting them to comply. So many of them still they don't even realize that the regulations even exist in the first place. So that will be a bit of a challenge for our users, though, and the geospatial community at large. It's not going to be too heavy of a lift to get our users compliant and have them want to be compliant in the regulations.
And there's a time limit to this too, right? I mean, this is not something that they have to have active right now. I believe they have something like 30 months until 2023.
Yeah, so the operators, the owners, have 30 months to become compliant. As manufacturers, we have 18 months to become compliant with the manufacturing part of it. So that's going to be a little bit of a challenge since there's still some uncertainty in the technology and the format and some things like that. But that's being worked out as we speak by a number of the UAS test sites that are out there. And we'll probably adopt some of those that are become recommended standards. The user, though, even if they have a non-compliant drone, they'll have 30 months from this month to be able to become compliant. And whether that means they get a new drone, if they're using something that's really low end and non-compliant, or whether it means retrofitting their existing drone like they will for our customers. So from the operator standpoint, they don't have to panic right now. They don't have to be compliant next week or anything like that. So it'll take some time. There's a big buzz around the new regulations, but it's a buzz that's going to not really go into effect for a number of months still.
Okay. For companies that have been looking at using unmanned aircraft, this is probably a pretty serious consideration, though. Should they maybe hold off on their purchase until all the details are worked out?
No, I would say not. The most UAS purchasers are going to be looking for a return on their investment much quicker than 30 months. In fact, most of our users are seeing returns on their investment and paying for the system within a year. So holding off on that productivity really doesn't make sense for a retrofit that might be a few $100s. So they may want to consider something a little bit more upscale if they're looking at something really low end, because it's going to be hard for some of these really low end drones to justify the expense of the retrofit and the upgrade, and they may not even be able to do it. So going with something maybe a little bit more established from a little bit more higher end geospatial manufacturer where we know that we're going to be retrofitting our systems is probably something to consider, but I certainly wouldn't hold off on starting to integrate the technology and the benefits of drones to those users that are interested in it.
Well, it's certainly working with a company like Leica Geosystems and the innovation of what we bring to the table, as well as Hexagon. Of course, Leica Geosystems is part of Hexagon, a known innovation leader. So certainly working with a company like ours is a help. You know that we're going to be on top of these issues. And there are definitely advantages to working with someone as knowledgeable as you, Bryan, as well. So thank you so much for these insights. To learn more about the new FAA drone rules, please follow the link posted with this video. Thank you.